Hey guys, welcome back to another review. I am going to hit on post World War II culture, 1950s America, often compared to the 1920s, a good compare and contrast. So look for some of the things that are similar and that are different. All right. First thing is the end of the war, okay? And not just the end of the war, but the end of the Depression. This was a 15-year period in which Americans had basically very little purchasing power. There were very little consumer goods. The Depression was difficult, obviously, in one way, and the war was difficult in another way. And it completely fundamentally changed American culture into something that looks much more like what we have today. First off was the GI Bill. You had millions of men and women coming back, and after seeing war and after leaving their small communities, they wanted something different. So the government passed the GI Bill, which gave GIs money to go to college. College admissions exploded in the 1950s and will again in the 1960s when women start going. And they also gave very low cost VA loans to buy houses. So where would those houses come from? Private housing was not a big thing in the United States until after World War II. The concept that we have today of having your own house in the suburbs was something that happened after World War II. The first suburb was 20 miles outside of New York City. It was a little place called Levittown. And the guy had the idea to buy up a farm field. It was a potato field and build what today traditionally looks like an American suburb. And this explosion took off. With the low VA loans that people were given, people were moving out to these new suburbs. They were marrying in record numbers and therefore having babies in record numbers. In some of these Levitt towns, the average was 3 children in the first 2 years that they moved into these communities. As you can see, between 1946 and 1964 is what is known as the massive baby boom or the baby boom generation. And recently, about 10 years ago, we had the Echo baby boom, but this is one of the largest generations in American history, as you can see. Now, what did this mean in terms of people moving? Migrations in this class are very important, and there are 2 major internal migrations that occur after World War II. Number one, there is a huge migration to the southern United States from the north. The great majority of the population for the history of this country has lived in the northeast of the United States. And for the first time by the millions again, people are moving to places like Florida, Texas, California. Number one, for the weather, which we'll get back to in a second. Number two, a lot of the new defense industries after World War II moved to those areas. Now, one of the reasons why people could not live in the South prior to this time was it's just hot. You do not want to be in Florida in the middle of summer. It's just not comfortable. But a new invention after World War II, as you can see in the black and white photo, was air conditioning. And air conditioning allowed this mass migration to the South to come. Secondly, one third of the entire American population in a 10-year period moved from urban areas, cities, to the new power in the United States, suburbs. Today, 45% of Americans live in a suburban setting. As you can see the picture there in the South, a suburb with a little pool kind of became part of the new American dream. So these are very important. These are fundamental changes in American history at this time. Now, what allowed this to happen, and this was completely at the same time, but it connected it, was the building of the Interstate Highway by Eisenhower. The Interstate Highway Act built massive transportation systems across the country. His main reason for this was he saw this idea in Germany when he invaded Germany during World War II. He saw the Autobahn that Germany had, and he saw this as a military necessity to get military troops from the east to the west or the west to the east coast of the United States. If you've ever been like on I-80, I-80 is a huge straight road. The reason for that is so that they could land military aircraft on that road. However, it had a secondary importance. All of these people moving to the suburbs basically connected the suburbs to the cities. People could move to the suburbs, work in the cities. All of a sudden, you had thriving metropolises. You had the building of schools and shopping malls that started. And suburbia was basically born because of these two things. Now, one of the things that's important about this, and Ms. Ulrich will talk about this, this is mainly a white American concept in the 1950s and 1960s. And in fact, in many things like the GI loans, a lot of these Levittowns did not even allow blacks to buy into these places, and that's an important exception to make sure that you mention. All right. Now, what did all of this add up to? When World War II ended, a lot of people thought that there was going to be another depression. They saw no reason why we wouldn't go right back into depression after the war ended. The exact opposite thing happened. It's the single biggest economic boom in American history. The combination of pent up demand of people who haven't been able to buy anything for 15 years, along with the fact that during World War II, most people were making money and saving it. And then the fact that much of the military production moved over to consumer production after the war. And the economy in the 1950s in the United States absolutely exploded. As you can see, we went as high as 36% of the global GDP in 1950, and that can continue. That huge height continued throughout the 50s and the 60s. Down in the bottom corner there, that became the new quote-unquote American dream. The idea that you could purchase a boat and a pool and a lawnmower and a bike and a barbecue, and just the idea that we stack up on consumer goods, and the idea that we were buying houses and everything that goes along with buying a house. Okay, as you can also see in the 50s and the 60s by the equality chart of change, everybody, all boats rose. People did very well. Everybody in America's salaries went up. Their consumer purchasing ability went up. And then you can see it drops off dramatically in the 1970s. And we'll obviously talk about it when we get to that. And as you can see, the 21st century thus far hasn't been great. So, all right. And then finally, because people were buying things, this led to consumer culture. All right. This led to what some critics called conformity. Basically, there was a new item out there called the television. Edward Murrow called it the vast wasteland. You guys are almost the post-television generation today, but television was huge. For the first time, the American culture was basically united in a singular idea, and people could hear the same news, they could watch the same shows. It standardized speaking in this country because people started hearing different accents in different parts of the region, but it was standardized by the television. People worried about teenagers watching too much TV. Sounds like today when people criticize teenagers for being on their iPhones all the time. Some things never change. However, as you can see in the 50s, as Mr. Irvin will talk about, there was much sexism in the consumerism. You can see that most women stayed at home. Look at the ad in the bottom corner. You mean a woman can open it? You guys should be very angry about that. And then obviously some icons like McDonald's and some of the other companies that become icons, Pepsi, Coke, put billions into advertising. And people could buy things because of a new invention called the credit card. Finally, conformity was kind of the key to 1950s culture, mainly idealized by Leave It to Beaver, which was quote unquote the perfect family. Again, notice suburban and white, close cut haircuts, loose sweaters. That was the style. Hula hoops, fiction writing, all became huge. However, there were changes happening near the end of the decade, and you can't just artificially cut off decades. You had James Dean and the first huge rock and roll star, Elvis Presley. You notice that their hair is a little bit longer. They had sideburns. Boys that wore sideburns like that to school were suspended. It was not allowed, and you start to see the rumblings of rebellion that is going to be the 1960s. And you especially see this with a new small group called the Beats. The Beats are the group that kind of led to the counterculture, and they rebelled against the consumerism and the conformity. You can see the woman and the man there that was very typical dress for the Beats, very much against what the mainstream culture was. And then, as always, just like in the 1920s, you see it in the literature. J.D. Salinger wrote Catcher in the Rye, which has one of the most iconic characters of all time in American literature, Holden Caulfield. And Catch 22 was also a critique of the post-World War II 1950s consumerism and conforming. Okay, so that's the 1950s, guys, in a nutshell. I hope this helped. Thanks a lot, guys.